Panel's about to start. Thanks a lot. All right. We have a really great panel here for you today. And it's particularly interesting to me because when I first started writing about Bitcoin in the summer of 2012, people weren't really talking about blockchain technology. There weren't rival cryptocurrencies that people discussed very much. In fact, people hadn't yet started calling Bitcoin the money or the Internet of Money. Instead, it was just being treated as the money of the Internet. And I think one of the things I'd like to do in this panel is kind of take it back to some of those early use cases, things that have been discussed from the very beginning, and see where we're at with them now, several years on. So I thought it would be good to start by having the gentlemen on the panel here each kind of go down and describe briefly the work that their company does before we delve into some more detailed questions.
Sure.
Yeah, take it away.
Hi, I'm Ron. I'm the CEO of a company called CoinsPH. We are a provider of baseline financial services in emerging markets where traditional banking penetration is very low. Our core market at the moment is Philippines, where banking penetration is still under 30%, and credit card penetration is still under 5%. We have built a solution basically based on blockchain technology, mobile-driven. I've been able to get pretty significant market penetration, and are working to scale up throughout the region.
Great.
Hi, I'm Nimrod. I'm co-founder and CEO of Simplex. We're a fraudless processing company. We process payments in a way that keeps the merchant in a world without any fraud, meaning that we take care of your credit card processing in a way that you're fully protected against fraud. Currently serving some of the giants in the market like BTCC, Bitstamp, Zappo, Mycelium. And we're actually we're helping the general public get into Bitcoin with small purchases, easy purchases with a credit card. And again, I think we're still in the very early days. Just to ask, how many of you have bought Bitcoin with your credit cards by raise of hands? Okay, so I have a lot of business to still do. So.
Sebastian.
Sebastian Serrano, I'm the founder of Ripio. We are a Bitcoin wallet similar to CoinsPH in Southeast Asia, but in South America. Our core market is Argentina, growing into Brazil and other countries across Latin America, where similarly, as all emerging markets, there is very low banking. Less than 30% of the population has a bank account or a credit card or debit card. Very low access to financial services, formal or semi-formal. And with our app, our users can buy things online, are able to use Bitcoin as a store of value. Many of these countries have high inflation and very poor currencies. One of our many distinctive things is that we allow users to buy on credit and pay in installments on merchants using Bitcoin as the rails for the payment.
I'm James Smith, CEO of Elliptic. We analyze Bitcoin transactions to try and uncover criminal activity. We do that in order to try and legitimize Bitcoin. We do that for a couple of core groups of clients. We have a product that helps exchanges to monitor their transactions and understand where the high-risk ones might be, help them comply with anti-money laundering regulation. And we also work with law enforcement when they're investigating cases that involve Bitcoin.
So the first question I'd like to ask is about financial inclusion. And Ron and Sebastian, I think this is really going to be aimed at you. From the earliest days of Bitcoin, some of the more idealistic members of the community talked about how great this peer-to-peer digital currency could be for the 2 billion adults around the world who have no bank account. And then the even larger number when you include them of people who are the so-called underbanked, that they may have a bank account, but they lack access to a lot of other traditional financial services. So you're in the Philippines, you're in South America. These are obviously quite different markets, but both of them share the fact that a large portion of the population fits into these categories that I just mentioned. I think Sebastian in South America, well below 50%, maybe below 30% of people have a credit card in many areas. So maybe you could tell us, years after the creation of Bitcoin, how is it progressing in providing financial inclusion in these parts of the world?
So first, I will say that the use case of speculation is not a bad use case. It's a valid use case, and especially in many of these countries that have very, very poor currencies. Like I'm in my 30s, and Argentina has dropped its currency 3 times to 0. And Bitcoin is proving to be a good store of value over year. So the use case to use Bitcoin as a way to save away from a currency that is always devaluating is a valid use case, and we have many users that buy Bitcoin every month as a store of value, and I think it's a valid use case. We focus a lot on bringing consumers that don't have any other. We are their first financial service. The use of this technology lowers the cost, so there is good potential to get more people online and being able to pay. We are still seeing like the speculation of the store of value like the biggest use case. And these days, with the price going up, it's also very good. But at the same time, we see more and more use cases. We are seeing many young kids using our service to buy video games online, for example. We see hundreds of payments every day to platforms for online gaming. These are very young kids, like 18 to 25, and they use our app. Like we have built a network where there are thousands of locations where you can top up with cash or wallet, and then they will get credit and be able to buy Bitcoins instantly, and being able to buy Counter-Strike or Grand Theft Auto. And this is something that we are seeing constantly grow. And there are segments, especially with young population, that this is becoming growing faster and faster.
Yeah, I think this speaks to how interesting this technology is, because our experience is actually somewhat different, and our customers use Bitcoin and blockchain in a different way. So Philippines and a lot of other markets in Asia have actually fairly stable currencies. And the key challenge for customers is actually having access to the financial system. So in an economy that's primarily driven by cash, it's just very hard to move money around. So the way that we see usage of the blockchain is actually more around settlement. If you look at the Philippines as a market, in one locally, 7,107 islands. Globally, about 10% of the population, 10 million Filipinos live abroad. They send about $27 billion a year back home. And it's just very expensive and very difficult. So we've really focused on building infrastructure around blockchain. So our customers, actually a lot of our customers use our product. The underlying settlement is happening on the Bitcoin blockchain, but they're actually not, they don't actually need to be directly, they don't touch Bitcoin themselves, right? So they see a peso value when they transact. They can go and deposit at a 7-Eleven, convenience store. We have 30,000 locations nationwide for getting cash in and cash out. And they can transact locally, cross-border with merchants the way they would have if they had a bank account or a card.
Yeah. Well, another early use case was, again, if Bitcoin is the money of the internet, then e-commerce is one that leaps to mind immediately. And it was a very big deal in early 2014 when Overstock.com started accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment. And the early enthusiasm was such that the company's leader, Patrick Byrne, confidently predicted he would do $10 million worth of Bitcoin sales in the first year alone. And I believe it turned out to be about 3 million. And so the consumer adoption of Bitcoin as a transactional currency, at least in the developed world, for these e-commerce purposes, it's been in some ways quite a bit slower than a lot of people expected maybe in 2014. I'd like to ask, Nimrod, you mentioned you think Simplex makes it a lot easier for people to acquire Bitcoins because instead of having to do bank transfers and so on, they can buy with a credit card. And with your service, they can the merchants and exchanges that are providing that ability to their customers can do it with more confidence because you're preventing fraud. Do you think these customers are trying to acquire Bitcoin as a transactional currency? And what do you think is the future? So we've just talked about the developing world. What do you think is the future of Bitcoin, online in the developed countries?
So I'm biased. I'm a big believer in Bitcoin. I think that people need to have easy access, right? It's the chicken or the egg problem, and I think we're providing the chicken or the egg. I don't know, one of them. So people can get their hands easily on Bitcoin instead of having a 3-day wire transfer to some exchange which they need to fully rely on. We also provide them security with being able to make a purchase with their credit card. But over the years, and the service is live for over 2 years now, we've seen that we maintain about 70%, that's 70% of new users constantly. So it's new people fueling basically everybody's ICOs here. So we take care of the new money coming into the system, and average transaction has doubled in the past year or so, but so has Bitcoin. So I think we can say that it's still new users, people who are interested to experience it, to try with it, to get introduced to this market, and later, I don't know what they're doing it. I'm hoping that they're continuing to experience with it, maybe buying larger amounts, maybe participating in ICOs or whatever else. It's still mostly around 30 years old users, mostly worldwide, mostly male, as you could imagine. But I think it's definitely gaining more and more people using it. And again, I think that over time, if we create a big enough community with big enough value of using Bitcoin, and by the way, we're going to start next month supporting Ripple and Ethereum as well, I think that people are kind of dragged into the ecosystem. And I think that's the most important thing that we do.
Dragged into the ecosystem, okay.
I think like on use cases and also in developing markets, something that hasn't been so much work is into it's difficult to change people's habits. And many companies have failed in the US trying to make people pay with their phone, and very large companies, and investing a lot of money. And so it's very difficult to change people's habits. And unless you have like a 10x improvement, like it's a really changer. So until you have that level of change, that's difficult to change people's behavior. And the US have a stable currency. There are everybody has debit cards and credit cards, so it's difficult to change the way they interact. So in order to get more massive adoption, we need to think on what use cases we can build that weren't feasible before, what we can do that people could not do before. And we go a lot into this thinking, how we build our use cases. So we see many people actually buying on Amazon through Purse. Because we explain them this way you can be able to buy things online that are not available in our country. Yeah. And then, or get kids that don't have a credit card to pay on Steam. So we teach them on how to do things that before they could not do. And then they will go into through all the hoops to try to understand and educate themselves and do that learning. So I think there is a lot of too much on many speculative things, but we need to get more into think what we can do that wasn't feasible before.
Sure. So I think we're talking about what could be done, and we're sort of forgetting about the fact that there has been one big growth area, and one thing that you couldn't do before is buy drugs easily. Bitcoin's great for that. So we've seen since 2012 a 10x growth in buying drugs on dark marketplaces. That's something you couldn't do easily before. Right. So this year, I think there'll be about $500 million worth of actual commerce done through dark marketplaces. I'm not saying that's great for Bitcoin, but it shows that it is actually fulfilling a real need.
Right, and right, and for the first 2 years of Bitcoin's existence, it was almost worthless. It wasn't until just after the creation of Silk Road and people started using it in this first dark web crypto market that it reached parity with the US dollar, and however it fluctuated after that point, it never fell below parity with the US dollar. So is Bitcoin still, James, the coin of the realm for on the dark web? I mean, there are a lot of rival cryptocurrencies now. Some of them claim to be more technically sophisticated. They promise even more anonymous transactions and so on. Is Bitcoin still number one in that space? And also, what kind of market share does that have in a sense? If the dark economy used to be a huge portion of the overall Bitcoin economy, what does it look like today?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is definitely still number one. So the biggest marketplace out there, Alphabet, also accepts Monero and doesn't have support for Ether. But we're not seeing much uptake on those. Bitcoin is still the big one. There are a few reasons for that. One is ease of access. So buying Bitcoin is much easier than buying the other things. Another reason is if you want to use one of these currencies for cybercrime, then you need to be able to launder the money. And in order to launder money in any currency, you need there to be a decent amount of other transaction activity to hide your laundering in. So while we're seeing obviously a big rise in lots of other coins, Bitcoin is still the biggest one out there.
Right. And now Bitcoin it's over $2,000. Maybe it's around $2,200 right now. Do any of you guys think the speculative fervor is helping consumer adoption of Bitcoin around the world, or do you think it's actually hindering it? Because if everyone thinks the price is just going to keep going up, maybe they just want to hoard Bitcoins, and eventually some people will lose their shirts, and maybe the tide of popular opinion will turn against it. I mean, there's different ways it could go, right? So what do you think?
I think it's a cycle, but I think it definitely is. The more attention, and by the way, we can see it in our transactions, that the more there's a straight correlation with Google searches to the word Bitcoin and the volume at the same day. So yeah, I think the more publicity, the better. Like I don't remember who the quote is, but there's no bad publicity. And I'm sure there are cycles. It will go up, it will go down. Their hearts will be broken. But same goes with stocks.
Right.
And again, I would also claim, by the way, sorry, just saying, I would also claim that just like with regular currencies, I think that 7% are speculation, right? Because banks buy from other banks and governments from other governments to hedge themselves, and I think it's going to be the same. And I think that many of the small purchases of Bitcoin are actually people worldwide just trying to understand the technology, take it apart. They read that it doubled in the last few days. They want a piece of that.
Yeah.
I think the key challenge that's facing us is actually not the value or not even the volatility. It's the scalability of the blockchain.
Right.
It's the cost of writing transactions and the speed of writing transactions. If you want to scale out, a financial inclusion service on top of blockchain, you're dealing with customers, who need their money quickly, and you're dealing a lot with small transactions. So those things are, I think we're going to have to see some solutions coming forward on that.
So despite the success you've seen in the growing, transaction volume and the growing uptake of, your consumer base, you think a lot of people are being excluded because of the limitations of the network in its current state?
We think that if you remove friction, right, it's easier to gain wider adoption. In Philippines, we are one of the top 3 financial apps right now, point blank, of any financial app. So there is already strong wide acceptance and usage of the product. But with that comes expectation, and consumers are coming on the platform. They're not expecting, they don't know about confirmations. They don't expect to wait 20 or 30 minutes for a transaction, to come through. I had a case last week.
Or 3 days.
Or 3 days. I had a case last week with a customer who was receiving about $40. And this was for a hospital bill that they needed to pay at that exact time. And it was getting delayed 4, 5, 6 hours. They couldn't check out of the hospital.
Wow.
How do you justify to that person that the blockchain is congested and mempool is really busy?
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Wow. No, that's interesting, because I would have thought, if you're sending money to your grandmother back in Cuba or India. Maybe she can afford to wait an extra hour. It's not that big of a deal, but actually this affects even people who are getting remittances, all kinds of use cases.
Yeah, no one can afford to wait, because if you could afford to wait, you would not be receiving a remittance, right? I mean, the urgency, is very, very high for the end consumer.
Yeah, yeah.
I think in general, people still don't understand. Most of our buyers don't understand the technology. They don't understand that the Bitcoin is not sent immediately. So we get tons of support tickets like 2 minutes after the purchase, I didn't get the Bitcoin. And you don't want to start to explain about,
Right.
no, the block didn't close, man.
Well, maybe when in the title being who actually uses Bitcoin, maybe that's something to talk about is, are the people using Bitcoin generally educated about the technology? Do they understand what they're using, or are they just using it because there's some buzz around it, they've seen some media headlines, or they've heard that the price is going up and they can make some money? What is it?
So I think the vast majority of transactions in Bitcoin are people speculating on price, moving money between exchanges.
Yep.
So, that's probably a lot to do with the hype. In terms of, if you look at actual commerce, and I guess the commerce I know best is what's happening on the dark web, that grows at a steady pace, like with adoption of many new technologies, and the fluctuations in price don't affect it that much. So the median transaction on those marketplaces is $100. Whether the price goes up or the price goes down, it doesn't really matter. People want to buy $100 worth of weed. So I think all of the hype doesn't really affect that. That just grows at a steady pace. A lot of that use is in the Western world. I'd be interested to hear from you guys about sort of volumes of actual use you're seeing in the developed world. But I think the major use case in the developed world is for buying things that you can't buy in shops.
So still in 2017, it's the fact that Bitcoin is this censorship-resistant form of digital cash, as they call it, that it allows you to buy things that maybe governments don't want you to buy.
And perhaps also important, as well as the purchasing of things that you can't buy elsewhere, is cybercrime more generally. Much bigger than that is ransomware. So that's about $1 billion a year industry.
Right.
That's huge. That's probably the biggest single use of Bitcoin.
Right.
We also see very unique types of fraud with regards to credit card fraud in this ecosystem, where people are being called like a technical support line, and they just guide the person through the steps of giving their credit card details and everything, and give them the address to send the Bitcoin to. So it's like a social engineering ransomware. And there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, it's interesting because, James, I know your company, Elliptic, when this huge ransomware outbreak hit recently, this WannaCry campaign, you were actually able to identify the 3 Bitcoin addresses that the ransom funds were kind of sent to and pooled in. And you're working, your company at least works with law enforcement agencies and so on to help them, analyze the blockchain and detect any illicit activity. One of the questions I've faced when I've been talking to audiences about my book that was recently published, they ask, well, how can criminals get away with it? How can we allow there to be this anonymous form of payment? And I try to tell them, well, actually, the blockchain it's quite transparent in some ways, and there are sophisticated methods of analysis we can do to follow the money trail. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and explain.
Yeah. So WannaCry was actually a bit of a disappointing piece of ransomware because for whatever reasons, there's been rumors of bugs in the code and so on. There were only 3 addresses associated with it, and there was no means for them to figure out who had made what payment. So people quickly realized they weren't going to get their files unlocked, and not many people sent money to those addresses. I think it collected about $100,000 worth. There have been much more successful ransomware campaigns, and the way a lot of them work is on a franchise model. So somebody creates a software and then sells licenses for the software on the dark web. So you can go and purchase it with Bitcoin, and then you're responsible for the distribution of it. And then for every computer that it locks up, the person has to pay in Bitcoin, and some Bitcoin goes to the distributor and some goes to the original developer. And
Smart
so
contract.
you've got a great model there
Right.
for pushing out and getting other people to do your distribution, and then you take a cut of the funds.
Right.
And these ones have been used over and over again and are working pretty well.
Well, how much of the transaction volume in Bitcoin that we're seeing right now, which I think both the price and the transaction volume are pretty much at an all-time high, how much is it, poor people that know nothing about Bitcoin, but they're kind of forced to go and buy it on an exchange somewhere just so that they can pay a ransom?
I don't know in terms of proportion on that. So I know that the proportion of transaction activity that's associated with dark marketplaces is around 4% of all Bitcoin transaction activity.
4%.
And ransomware as a business is about twice as big as dark marketplaces. I don't know exactly how that relates to overall transaction activity, but it's a decent proportion.
Yeah, fair enough. What parts of the world do we think are really hot spots for Bitcoin right now? Where is it being used the most? I mean, I imagine in the developed world, there might be some sophisticated tech-savvy people who they're kind of speculating in it in a knowing way, so they might be using it heavily, but then there might be other parts of the world where people are using it in a different way. So what are kind of, is it still mainly a developed world phenomenon, even though a lot of people are saying its biggest use case could be in the developing world where people lack access to traditional financial services?
As today, the main use case is store of value and speculation. The biggest volumes are here.
Yeah.
I will say that, and we see on our users that many small transactions and growing use base in cross-border transactions like remittances or freelancers charging. But right now, the biggest volumes are in speculation,
right.
mostly in Asia, not in the US. So still, the biggest thing is the speculation.
But Sebastian, your company, it started in Argentina, but it's been pushing into other markets, right?
Yeah.
Brazil and Mexico and so on. And what sort of activity are you seeing there?
Well, these are all emerging markets that have similar, are similar to Argentina. So we see similar activity. Maybe in Brazil there is a little bit more of trading than in Argentina, but we are seeking building these use cases for people that's not bank. So we're going into this market that our solution fits.
Yeah. Do any of you see the speculation as perhaps helpful to consumer adoption, that since it's driving the price and the market cap up, that makes it easier to move large amounts of value in the form of Bitcoins across borders and so on, that it's pretty tough to be a global currency if it has a $5 billion market cap, but maybe a $50 billion or $100 billion market cap makes it much more viable?
To be a global currency and to have like actual global commerce, we need an order or two of magnitude bigger than the current market cap. So it's good that the price is going up. Like, there is no enough liquidity to do large transactions in most countries, and until the price goes up at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, that's not going to be feasible. So it's good that there is a rise on the price. And also, like, we have gone through these cycles a few times already, so we know how the drill goes. And people will get excited, the price will go up, they will go down, there will be, but there is a lot of new people and new money into Bitcoin right now. And it's mostly in Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's not into the ICOs. The ICOs is more of the old Bitcoin crowd looking to get 10x or 100x again. It's new. They got addict. But the new people is getting into Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I think it's good in general.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
you said it.
yeah, so there are about 5 to 6 cryptocurrencies now with the recent price rise in the last couple of months. There are 5 to 6 cryptocurrencies now that have a market cap of $1 billion or more. That is a very, very new thing. And James, you mentioned that right now Bitcoin is still #1, at least on the dark web, for transactions. But are we, at Consensus 2018 going to be talking about who is really using Dash, who is really using Zcash, who is actually using Monero rather than Bitcoin? And perhaps because of some of the limitations in the Bitcoin network, it could be out-innovated even for its core use case as decentralized digital cash?
I think Bitcoin is the main one right now. It's for usage and for the store of value. But unless scaling gets solved, there is a good chance that others will take place. And if we see the price has been going up, but the share in the market has been going down. The price of Bitcoin has not gone as fast up as the other currencies. So
yeah, but if you said that most other currencies are pumped by people who are from within the ecosystem, they're just transferring their Bitcoins to ICO, so it's not.
But if we keep seeing fees at the level they are, if you want a one confirmation time, you had to be paying $2 on fees, and that is not good for the underlying use cases. And technologies are valued on their fundamentals by use, and the speculation will eventually go away, and what will remain is the use cases. And if Bitcoin loses people doing remittances, people doing the cross-border transactions, buying online, the dark markets, then it will lose the support.
Yeah, but it shouldn't necessarily be one currency to rule them all. It could be Bitcoin as a global currency in which transaction cost doesn't necessarily matter that much because it's a transaction mostly between banks or financial institution, and that there's another currency mostly for remittances, and another currency for the darknet, and another currency for anything, just like you have gazillion stocks or multiple currencies or multiple investments.
Yeah, I think it's important that we fix the scaling thing, but I don't think it's going to be the thing that breaks Bitcoin or not. At the moment, most people are using Bitcoin to speculate. And if you have to pay a couple of bucks to buy $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, it's not that big a deal.
It's going to grow by 10% tomorrow, so who cares?
Right, exactly. So it doesn't, I think that will get fixed. You don't need 10 different digital caches for the internet. You might need some things for sort of edge cases, and you might need the consumer one that is cheap and fast versus the big main one that's the internet currency. But I don't think we need, I don't know how many there are, how many basically replicas of each other there are. Hundreds, so I don't think we'll be talking about all of them next year. The ones that are that may stick around are the ones that add very different use cases, I think. So platforms for completely different types of contract. Ethereum being an obvious, interesting one. It adds. It's not really, Ether's not there to be a currency. The platform is there to do a lot of different things. So those are the kind of blockchains that I think might stick around.
Sure.
So I think we have to separate the value store from the functional, use cases, right? And I mean, I agree on the value store side. The technology doesn't matter as much, actually, right? And the scaling is not important. But if you look on the use case side, it's actually it's very important because, I mean, across our transactions, actually the majority of our transactions are going to be under $10. So we were, last year we were pushing about 3 to 5% of all transactions on the blockchain, not by volume, by count. This year we took a bunch of those transactions off-chain because the technology just didn't scale. So I think for use case specific stuff, actually, either blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain adapts to deal with those volumes, or it's going to move to Ethereum, it's going to move to other solutions. From a consumer point of view, it actually doesn't matter. At least for emerging markets, for financial inclusion applications, and 99.9% of people don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, I need Bitcoin, right? They think, oh, I have to pay this bill and I have to get on public transportation and spend like 45 minutes and stand in scorching heat behind the other 50 people who thought of doing the same thing today because it's payday. And what they care about is, will my payment go through? Will it go quickly? Am I exposed to risk with this? And so those are the things that we need to address as a technology. And there's huge market and huge, social implications for solving this problem. It's a very, it's a very, it's a very big project.
In order to get massive adoption, it needs to disappear. Like the technology needs to be transparent. The user doesn't need to know what is happening. Like when you're using WhatsApp to send a text to someone in another country, you don't care about TCP or HTTP, or you just want to communicate with your family member. And we need to get the technology to that level that these things the user doesn't need to know about them. I don't care about confirmation time or value, just being able to transact online. Until we get into that point, we won't get into mass adoption.
Sure.
We're at this really, really interesting intersection, of time, right? Because actually everything in payments is getting digitized, and it's really easy to confuse, digitization of digital money with financial inclusion, right? With kind of the growth of consumer connection to financial services, but they're actually not the same, right? And the promise of blockchain is of financial inclusion, because the thing that's really exciting with blockchain is it's democratic. When we onboard people onto the system, anybody can provide them with a financial service. It's different than Alipay or PayPal dominating the payment market, and then basically only their specific partners can offer loans or financial services, right? So by scaling on top of blockchain, basically we're building an almost perfect marketplace for financial applications. And that's that for me, that's really where this can go.
Yeah. Well, that's maybe a great way to end it, but we have 3 or 4 minutes for questions from the audience. If anyone wants to take the mic, I see it right there being kind of passed around. If anyone has a question. Anybody? They covered everything so well. No one was left with any lingering. Oh, I see a hand there, maybe a couple hands.
Hi, my name is Freddy. I'm from Venezuela. And I would like to know if you've ever considered a use case for Bitcoin as a way to get around capital controls in a government. Maybe Ripio has, maybe.
Venezuela is a tough country, and we actually have our support team in Venezuela, in Caracas, and we pay them in Bitcoin. So there is a way to use it, and the entire team gets their salary in Bitcoin. Sadly, it's very difficult to provide service for a company that when you're building a company, you have to open bank accounts, and so for us, it's tough to give service in the country. We try it many times, but have been super complex. There is no rule of law, basically. So, but there is people using it, and we see through peer-to-peer exchanging, like buying and selling Bitcoin through cash. There is a lot of usage of Bitcoin in Venezuela right now, and it's one of the few ways to do a remittance in the country, and the other ones are super offline, like sending Amazon gift cards, physical Amazon gift cards. And so this a decent volume of Bitcoin in Latin America is in Venezuela because of it's the only one of the few ways to get aid there.
Any other questions? Okay.
A quick follow-up to paying in Bitcoin. Are you paying fixed amount of Bitcoin, or you are paying fixed amount of fiat and converting whatever Bitcoin it comes to? Sebastian?
Yeah, so I didn't got the question right, but they have a salary in dollars, and we convert it into Bitcoin and send it to their addresses. That's how we pay them.
So you're using Bitcoin as a store of value and not as a currency then?
They have the tough choice of do I stay on Bitcoin or I sell it for bolivars, and bolivars are always going down. So it's right now there is mostly staying in Bitcoin, I believe.
So the last question on that is, how do you, when you send money, and to all of you, whoever can take that, is the liquidity, market liquidity of converting Bitcoin to fiat currencies?
Particularly in Venezuela, is the only thing that works is peer-to-peer through like local Bitcoins or forums. And for someone that is moving a salary is good enough. For any other thing, it will be there is not enough. There is no one with enough cash to be able to do that, and you have to think like $1 is 8,000 bolivars, or it can get to 16,000, and the largest bid is 100. So one Bitcoin
Shoebox.
will be a bag of bills, and these are transactions done in cash. So it's a failed economy.
Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you so much for listening to the panel.